There's a brutal truth that very few men have the courage to face. A truth so uncomfortable that most would rather live in ignorance, pretending not to see it. You believe, or have always believed, that being a good man, loving, present, available, is the path to earning love, loyalty, and respect. You believed that the more you give, the more you'll be loved. But what if I told you that this is one of the greatest lies ever told to men? Sigmund Freud, yes, the father of psychoanalysis, discovered something shocking while studying human behavior, especially within romantic relationships. The man who fully surrenders doesn't earn love. He loses something infinitely more valuable, his own soul. Yes, you heard that right. When you make approval, acceptance, and the love of others the center of your existence, you slowly begin to dim, to disappear, to dissolve, until there's nothing left but an echo. And the question you urgently need to ask yourself is simple, direct, and brutal. How many pieces of myself have I already given away in exchange for crumbs of affection? If this makes you uncomfortable, if it stings, then you're exactly where you need to be. Because today, you'll face a truth that has the power to set you free or destroy you. If you're too afraid to look in the mirror, you see, the cruel part is that it starts very early. Since childhood, we are taught that to be a good man, we must be nice, helpful, loving, gentle. We are trained to believe that love is a transaction and that the one who gives more receives more. But this is the first trap. The man who lives to please is not admired. He is used. And no, this isn't malice. It's not a conspiracy. It's unconscious. It's biological. It's written in the deep codes of human desire. Freud saw this over and over in his patients. He said that when a man makes love his only source of validation, he disconnects from himself. He stops being a man and becomes an emotional object, a psychological crutch. Do you see the problem? The man who molds himself, who bends, who lives to please, loses exactly what made him worthy of love in the first place, his own identity. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just look around. How many men do you know who have lost their vitality, their energy, their spark, trying to be whatever their wife, girlfriend, or society expected them to be? How many smile on the outside, but are hollow on the inside? Men who have forgotten their own name, their own desires, their own boundaries. Freud saw this with disturbing clarity, and he said, the price of being the perfect man for others is becoming the imperfect man for yourself. And you? How many times have you traded your essence for a little approval? How many times have you swallowed your own truth just to keep someone close? If that question hurts, it's because your soul is screaming, begging you to wake up. There's an uncomfortable truth, one that Freud saw long before anyone else. Truth that maybe you felt, but never dared to name. She doesn't want peace. She wants tension. You were taught that being available, predictable, loving, and constant was the way to be loved. But what Freud discovered is that human desire, especially female desire, doesn't feed on what is guaranteed, controlled, or domesticated. Quite the opposite. Desire is born from mystery, from tension, from what cannot be fully possessed. Freud called this the dark continent, a metaphor for the female unconscious, mysterious, complex, unexplored. And he realized, often not even women themselves understand what truly attracts them. She says she wants security, but her body responds to the man who represents risk. She claims she craves stability, but her heart races for the one who doesn't bow. She says she wants love, but gives herself to the man who doesn't make her the center of his life. Why? Because in the female unconscious, love and self-mastery go hand in hand. She does not desire a man who orbits around her emotional whims. She desires a man who orbits around his own center, The man who doesn't fold, who doesn't need her, who doesn't depend on her smile to exist. And here lies the paradox that destroys thousands of men every day. When you give everything, you also give away your value. Desire does not grow from comfort. Desire grows from uncertainty, from healthy doubt, from the realization that this man is free, so free that she will never have total control over him. And that, exactly that, is what keeps her interested, obsessed, devoted. But no one told you this. They taught you the opposite. Show her you're different. Show her you're always available. Show her you're better than the rest. And without realizing it, you became predictable and invisible. Freud looked at this and, with brutal clarity, said, "The one who makes himself fully available, makes himself fully disposable. And now, maybe you understand why, no matter how much you gave, the return never came equally. If there's one lie modern society spreads, it's this: be vulnerable, show your weaknesses, open your soul. That's strength. But is it really?" Freud was one of the first to realize, not always. There's a brutal difference between being vulnerable by choice and being vulnerable out of need. And unfortunately, most men never recognize that thin line. The man who opens his soul expecting to be embraced often finds himself rejected, not because she's cruel, not because she's evil, but because unconsciously, something inside her interprets that as weakness. And this isn't malice, it's biology. It's the unconscious, because in the dance of life, the feminine seeks protection. And protection can only come from the one who stands solid, grounded, centered, the man who cries too much, who exposes himself too much, who lives in pursuit of her approval, loses something sacred in the game of attraction, the mystery, the firmness, the center. It's not that you can't have fears, insecurities, or pain. It's that the one who must carry and resolve it is you. Freud knew this when he said, "Love is inevitably a psychic battlefield, where the one who folds loses, and the one who centers becomes irresistible." The cruel irony? You thought that by showing your wounds, you would be loved, but often, by doing it excessively, you became invisible. The question echoing inside you right now is simple. Am I showing myself, or am I exposing myself just to be validated? The difference between these two is exactly the difference between being desired and being discarded. There's a powerful image Freud carved into the masculine psyche. The desirable man is not the man who satisfies, it's the man who masters himself. And no, we're not talking about dominating others. We're talking about something infinitely rarer and more powerful, dominating your own impulses, your own hunger, your own needs. The man who doesn't control himself is controlled, and the man who lives desperate to be accepted, loved, and validated becomes a slave to that pursuit. And here lies the truth. Freud ripped from the guts of the human mind. The man who surrenders to the need to be desired loses his value. What does she really crave, deep in her unconscious? She craves the man who doesn't need her, the man who is so committed to his own path, his own mission, his own center, that he doesn't even notice if she's testing, disappearing, or provoking. That man does not react. That man does not beg. That man does not negotiate his dignity. Why? Because he possesses something incredibly rare today: emotional self-sufficiency. He is whole, complete. She may enter his life, but she is not the center of his life, and that simple fact drives her insane. Freud called this sublimation, the process where a man transforms his most primitive instincts, desire, neediness, emotional hunger, into something greater. He turns his need into discipline, his desire into purpose, his insecurity into ambition, and paradoxically, the more he becomes self-sufficient, the more she desires him, not because he kneels, but because he stands tall, firm, centered. Freud understood this when he said, "Anatomy is destiny, not in the physical sense, but in the psychological." 1. The man who understands his nature, who accepts the biological and psychological game, masters his own reality. And what Freud taught us, brutally, is that true love is not found when you lose yourself in another, but when you finally find yourself. There's a silent tragedy happening all around us. Men walking around, empty, dimmed, disconnected from themselves, and most don't even realize it. They think they're being good husbands, good partners, good men, but in reality, they've become shadows of who they once were. Freud saw this every day in his office. He realized there's a massive price a man pays when he decides to live for others, when he makes external validation the center of his existence. And that price has a name: the loss of his own soul. With every compromise you make, every time you swallow your truth, every boundary you let be crossed, you lose a piece of yourself, a piece that never comes back. And slowly, the things that once made you unique, interesting, magnetic, seductive, they disappear. You stop being the man she once admired and become the man she merely tolerates. And here's the cruelest, most painful, most devastating part. She doesn't reject you because you're bad. She rejects you because you stopped being you. Freud called this the neurosis of self-sacrifice, the phenomenon where a man believes that to be loved, he must erase himself. But in practice, the more he erases himself, the less he is seen. And when he finally realizes, when he looks in the mirror, he no longer knows who he is, no longer knows what he wants, no longer knows what he feels. The man who fully surrenders, believing it will protect him from pain, actually chooses the cruelest pain of all, the pain of abandoning himself. And if this speaks to you, it's your soul knocking, begging to come back. Maybe, right now. You're realizing that everything you believed about love, loyalty, and devotion was a trap, an invisible psychological trap. Not one that was set against you, but one you set for yourself. Freud used to say, human suffering doesn't come from what happens to us, but from what we choose to allow. And you? How long have you allowed yourself to be molded by the expectations of others? The good news: there's a way back, a path that is neither easy, nor comfortable, nor popular. But it's the only path for a man who desires to be free. And that path has a name: individuation. Freud, and later Carl Jung, his student and later rival, both understood this. It's the process where a man stops living to be accepted and starts living to be himself, the man who chooses himself, who rebuilds himself, who becomes his own gravitational center, becomes a man who cannot be manipulated, used, or discarded. He doesn't chase, he doesn't beg, he doesn't negotiate his dignity, because he understands one brutal truth: love that needs to be bought isn't love. And here's the most brutal paradox of all: when you rebuild yourself, when you stop trying to be chosen, you become exactly the man that everyone wants to choose. But at that point, the choice is no longer theirs. It's yours. The man who chooses himself stops being a prisoner of others' desires and becomes the sovereign of his own destiny. There's a type of man that scares people, that unsettles them, that doesn't fit into the neat little boxes of modern life. He's not the most handsome, not the most charming, not the most available, but he carries something rare: presence, gravity, center, sovereignty. The man who is enough for himself has nothing to prove. He doesn't chase. He doesn't try to convince anyone that he deserves love, respect, or admiration. And paradoxically, because of that, he becomes magnetic. Because deep down, every feminine desire, whether conscious or not, craves a man she cannot dominate, a man so whole, so complete, so connected to his own center, that not even her love can pull him out of it. This man doesn't live for love. He lives for his purpose. And if she chooses to walk beside him, that's fine. But he will not leave his path. Not for her. Not for anyone. Freud once said, "The greatest tragedy of the modern man is not being rejected by others, it's rejecting himself." And what you need to understand, right here, right now, is simple. The love that's truly worth it isn't the love that completes you. It's the love that overflows, because you were already complete. When you wake up to this, you will never, ever be the same again. So now tell me, what are you going to choose? Will you continue being the man who lives to be chosen? The man who bows, who begs, who offers pieces of his own soul in exchange for scraps of attention? Or will you become the man who chooses himself, who rebuilds his own identity, who places his mission at the center, and who understands that true love only arrives when you no longer need it to feel whole? Because here's the truth, raw and unfiltered. The man who surrenders loses his soul. The man who rebuilds himself becomes unbreakable. And from today forward, my friend, you can no longer pretend you don't know this. You've been warned. If this video hit you, if this truth shook something deep inside, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and, more importantly, watch this video right here on the screen, because it's going to show you another truth that no one else ever had the courage to tell you. I'll see you there.